Hello, friends. Welcome back to another edition of the Lovecast with Jamal podcast. It's great to be back on the show with you today. A little bit of a different show today. I'm actually coming kind of a blast from the past. I'm actually just going to do a solo episode today. Some things on my heart I wanted to just talk to you about and share with you from my heart. And a lot of it has to do with the current events that we're dealing with at the moment. And I know this is a podcast, so I'm not exactly sure when you're listening to this episode, but the truths I want to share in this episode are actually very much relevant for any time period. Okay. So as of this recording, and those of you who are paying attention to the world know that there's been a significant conflict in the Middle East. Kind of broke out this last week, and here in the United States, our government's very much getting involved with this global conflict. And it was almost to a year to I don't know if people realize this, but it was almost literally a year from the date in which the last global conflict broke out, and our government was also getting very much involved in sending guns and ammunition and weapons, to the conflict in both places. And so we're doing that again. And this is it's like a broken record. It just keeps repeating, right? But there is something really important that we want to talk about today, especially as these shocking events unfold, and then the very predictable responses come. The predictable responses: a call to violence, a call to arms, a call to defend and revenge and retaliate, and all these things happen. Right? This is as old as history itself, but it's very important that when these social pressures erupt, and it's all you hear about on the media, our government does certain things, it's important to do some introspection for all of us. And I'm very convinced of this. And, if you're listening to this today and you feel like, yes, war is just inevitable. Violence is inevitable. Sometimes you have to kill other people to defend yourself and to get, to make this a safer world. This podcast is not for you. You're still under, and I'm just going to be very blunt, you're still under the delusion that you can kill your way to peace. And you haven't paid enough attention to history to know that that is absolutely a failure 100% of the time. So if you're into that mindset that you can just kill your way to peace and respond to conflict, no matter what kind of conflict it is, right? I'm talking, obviously on a global scale with war, but even in interpersonal relationships, work relationships, family dynamic, if you're under the illusion that you can attack back and think that you're going to solve the problem through force or using tactics that are similar to the tactics that have been used against you, if you think that's a winning strategy, you're under a very great delusion and illusion. And this is not the podcast for you. You won't get anything out of it. So you can just turn it off right now. But if you are somebody who desires something more than perpetual conflict, if you are somebody who desires more than just the broken record of fight, send weapons, react to violence with violence, then you want to tune in here. If you actually care about peace and you want to cultivate peace, a life of peace, a life of strength, a life of productivity, of power, then you want to tune in to this episode, right? So what I want to talk to you today about is, how do we cultivate a lifestyle and a culture, an inner culture of peace in the midst of violence? It's super important. How do we cultivate a culture of peace in the midst of violence, in the midst of a violent society? And I'm just here to tell you that we live in a very violent society here in the West. We believe in violence. Our government uses it. It's the greatest federal expenditure: violence, weapons, almost $1 trillion a year spent on violence at the government level. Our medical industry uses language of violence to try to attack disease, There's violence at just every level of society. It does not work. It's a failure. That would be a whole other episode where we can kind of flesh that out a little bit. But how do you cultivate peace? How do you become a peaceful person? How do you cultivate a culture of peace in the midst of such violence, in the midst of a violent society? Well, there's really four things I want to talk about today, right? Just four realities, four dynamics to recognize. And if you can recognize these four dynamics, you are on your way to a life of power, of strength, and of peace. Okay. So let's jump right into it. What is the first reality I would like you, like all of us, to recognize in the midst of violence? Yep. Number one is the fruits of survival. When you are in the survival mindset, you are susceptible to great violence. You will be both on the giving and receiving end of tremendous violence when you are in the survival mindset. And what do I mean by that? Well, the human nervous system, okay, there's really two operating systems that human beings have in our physiology, right? There is a thing called the fight or flight response that is associated with the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is located at the base of a human being's brain. It's very primitive. It goes way back in our development as a species. It's really just there to keep you alive. And when that turns on, when you're in a fight or flight or survival mindset, that base, you are actually the whole, the most sophisticated part of your brain, which is developed over a long period of time, which is very sophisticated. The frontal lobe, the parts of the brain that allow us to go beyond survival, right? That totally gets shut down. So you really become very animalistic when you are operating in survival, in the survival mindset. Every decision is processed through the lens of, life or death. And believe it or not, the survival mindset has many different dynamics. Anytime you feel that what you need for life is lacking in some way, you initiate or engage with that survival or the sympathetic nervous system at some level. And when that happens, nothing really good comes from it. You only have it for extreme danger situations in order to respond to that. The survival mechanism kicks on. But if you're going to make any kind of decisions about your life, about the life of other people, if you're going to be in leadership of any capacity, you need to have that survival mechanism, fight or flight mechanism, largely turned off. Because when you're in survival mindset, any decision you make, the energy of that's always very resistive in nature. Okay. So when you're in survival, and this is true of any human being, I don't care what your religion is, what your nationality is, how well you've been brought up, you could be very religious. It doesn't matter. When you're in survival mindset, all of us are capable of acts of violence, great violence. Have you ever lost your temper? You know exactly what I'm talking about. When you're in survival mindset, the things you will say and do could be quite destructive. True of any human being. And that obviously we think of anger, we think of extreme, like maybe physically violent things, but anytime that you are in survival mindset, maybe it's even financially, right? You feel like you're not going to have enough money to live. The things you will do would be things you would never do if you were not in survival. The things you will do to survive will completely take you out of your own nature. It'll lead you against your own essence, your own being, your own nature. That is the insidious nature of the survival mindset. So whenever you're in survival mindset, you feel threatened in some way, you're capable of acts of great violence, and you will justify it in the name of survival. Absolutely. It's true of any group, any nation, any individual. That's, for most of you listening to this, you know that. This isn't anything new, but it's important you recognize it. And this is why we spend so much time, at least I do, of getting out of the survival mindset, because you cannot actually tap into the deeper dimensions of life when you're in the survival mindset. When you're in the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight nervous system, your intelligence is almost inaccessible to you. The creativity, the creative potential of you as a being, the ability to come up with solutions to any problem is cut off when you're in the survival mindset. You're either surviving or you're living, but you cannot do both. When you turn off, however, when we learn how to turn off the survival mindset and get into the mindset of living, that's a whole other dimension of life. And that's an inner dimension. And there are techniques, obviously, in the coaching work that I do. We talk about and we employ a process in which we begin to shut down the sympathetic nervous system and cultivate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is another heart-based nervous system that we all have in our physiology. And when we learn to turn that on, deeper states of being, higher dimensional states of being, the creativity, the solutions, the ability to be loving and peaceful and to cultivate and create loving and peaceful solutions is turned on when we're in the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, the sympathetic nervous system, or the fight, is coined by the term fight or flight, but the parasympathetic nervous system is coined by the term rest and digest. This is the state of peace. And when you're in the parasympathetic nervous system, you're in a very peaceful state, and the decisions and actions you take from that actually cultivate and lead to more peaceful solutions. We can say a lot more about that, but let me leave it there for today with that. That is the first reality I want you to recognize. The fruits of survival are very violent. You are capable of great violence and resistance when you are in the survival mindset. Nothing of lasting good or creativity or peace can come from the survival mindset. Number two, the second reality I want to talk about today with you is this. Whenever a conflict erupts, and again, we're talking about this because there is a massive conflict that has erupted in a part of the world, but it's been done in such a way to grab your attention. This is due to the kind of world we live in with social media and the media and our government. And these are all events, and the way they're portrayed to the populace is to create shock, to create sadness, to create outrage. And whenever this happens, right, and our fight or flight mechanism is triggered, I mean, just pay attention to conversations going on online. I mean, I watched the news the other night, and I listened, and I have to be honest, it takes a lot to shock me. I actually was listening to the news and I was shocked, not because of the violence that's happening in the world, but because of the educated people that I heard, government officials, high, military officials, politicians, social commentators that were on the airwaves this past weekend advocating for total annihilation of people in the name of self-defense. I mean, advocating flattening cities and completely razing to the ground, and, massive cities, leaving, millions of people homeless. I mean, just advocating for that in the name of vengeance, revenge, self-defense, all of these things. It was all justified, of course. And when that happens, when you're in the survival mindset, right? When you feel threatened and you feel attacked, it's very easy for the brain. And the brain the brain causes us to see through this illusion of separation. It's a self-defense. It's a psychological self-defense mechanism. I totally understand it. But you need to understand that it's completely false, right? It's completely false. Because the second reality that I want to tell you about today is the fact that the group, the person, the society, whoever it is that you think is reprehensible or evil that you need to oppose, If you see them as being fundamentally different than yourself, I want you to hear me on this one. This is such an important point. If you see that person, that group, the nation, whoever it is, that you're your spouse, your boss, your coworker, it doesn't matter who it is, whoever you're having conflict with, if you see them as being fundamentally different than you are under a delusion, a complete illusion of separation. Because here's the truth. This is the second reality I want you to take note of. The person you are in conflict with is motivated by the exact same desire that you have. You will never lay eyes on another human being that is fundamentally motivated differently than you are. Now, the school of thought I come from, and I've been trained in, and I've observed this myself in many, many, many different occasions and situations, is that human beings have really just about 6 core, what I call drivers or human needs. And there's different schools of thought that, some will be 4, some will be 5, some will be 6, but roughly they're all the same. Now, I don't want to get into all 6 of those today. That'd be a different podcast. But we all have about 6 core drivers that really motivate all of us in life. These core drivers are good. They're important. They're needful. And I want to talk about the first 2, though. All right. The first 2, especially in situations of conflict, right? I want to talk about the first 2 human drivers that we all have. The first one is this: first human need, first human desire that we all have, the first human driver, whatever word you want to use, is the need for security or certainty. It's the need to feel safe. Security, certainty, safety. These are all interchangeable words for the core basic human need we all have: to feel safe, to feel rooted and grounded, secure. And when a human being doesn't feel safe or secure or grounded, it's trauma. And what you will do from that place is desperate. Desperate people who do not feel safe will go to desperate measures to try to restore that safety. Right? But this is an inner driver for the need to feel safe and secure, certainty, right? That's all human beings on any side of any conflict, any party, any human being, they need to feel safe. And if they don't, they will do desperate things. It's not a justification for violence. It's just a truth you need to be aware of. There needs to be a recognition of that, because in times like today, when violence is being not only talked about, but then we're being called to respond with violence or potential violence, to react to violence that was enacted first, right? Whenever this is happening, you will hear language of the other side is evil. These are animals. These are evil people. These are, fundamentally different than yourself. You'll hear language talking about they and those people and they are, and it's all very much coming through a lens, a perception of separation, as if that other group or person or society or whoever you're in conflict with, maybe it's even in your own individual life, whenever you start perceiving the other person as being motivated from a place that's fundamentally different than yourself, you have lost it. You have lost your grip on reality. If you think the group that you're defending yourself from is fundamentally different than you, you are deluded. All human beings have the same core drivers. They all want the same thing. All of us, we all want the same thing. Security, certainty, safety is number 1. Number 2, the second human need that I want to talk about for this conversation is this: all of us need to feel free, liberated, that we have freedom, that we have possibility, that we are not under the thumb of anybody or controlled by anybody. All of us need to feel that. And if we do not feel that, Again, it triggers anytime there's a lack in one of these 6 human needs, the sympathetic nervous system gets triggered, your fight or flight mechanism comes on, and then you begin to resist in order to defend or protect or secure these human needs of security or freedom. This is true of all human beings at every level, from an individual level, in a job, in a relationship, from a societal level to a national level. You just need to be aware of that. And if you're in conflict with somebody, especially at the level of violence, whenever violence erupts, like we're seeing in society, in the world between 2 societies or 2 groups of people or 2 nations, usually more times than not, one or both of these needs are being threatened, right? The sense of security and a sense of freedom and possibility. So, and I want to say this, okay? Sometimes when I talk about peace or talk about becoming a peaceful person, a lot of people assume like, oh, this is just Pollyanna. This is just idealistic thinking. This is just fluffy thinking. I actually had somebody say, Jamal, well, that's just great fluffy thinking. But when your children are being attacked or when your nation's being attacked, I mean, what do you do then? And that's an easy, yeah, but kind of conversation, and I want to say this, that the only time we talk about peace we're having a conversation about peace because of conflict. But if the only time we actually are actively, passionately pursuing peace, a culture of peace, cultivating a culture of peace, if the only time we're ever doing that is when conflict erupts, then we're totally missing the point. Conflict erupts because there is no peace. There's not been a culture of peace cultivated. That's why conflict erupts. Okay. So, and then when conflict erupts, it's hard. It's hard, right? It's like people don't think about their health when it's easy. And then when they come down with some massive diagnosis of some serious disease or chronic ailment, then people start wanting to think about their health. And it's harder then. Obviously, it's not impossible. It's actually, there's no better time than now to start addressing what's needed, of course. So if that's health, that's health. If that's peace, that's peace. But you get the point I'm trying to make. We need to start cultivating a lifestyle of health, of peace today. Even if there's no conflict or health issue going, you need to address it today, because if you don't do it when it's easy, how do you do it when it's hard? Right? So I want to say this because people do accuse me of being idealistic or having this Pollyanna thinking, oh, well, that's well and good until it happens to you. I don't say this as, I just say this so my background. And if you know me, you know this. I spent almost 5 years working behind bars at a very violent place, state penitentiary. I was a corrections officer. I worked with people who were locked up for crimes. And as you may know, it's not a walk in the park, being locked up for 8 hours behind bars with inmates that have all been convicted of crimes. You get a couple thousand people all in one location that all think a certain way and have a certain disposition towards violence. Yeah, it's you see all kinds of things. I've seen people at their worst behaviors, right? I've experienced people at their lowest. Working in a prison, you see everything. I am fully aware of the cruelty that people are capable of. I know that when people are operating with such tension, stress, fight or flight, most folks that I worked with in the institution, in the prison, were folks who had a lot of trauma and actually grew up. They didn't know another way. They lived in constant fight or flight. And so when you work around people like that all the time, you see all kind of things. And I know what can be done, what the cruelty that people can do when they're operating in this might makes right kind of world. And I've seen it both on the ends of criminals who are locked up behind bars. And I've also seen what that same mindset can do with people who have the levers of power as well. People who are in charge, right? When they feel threatened or when they govern through fear, right there, the things they can do to the people they're governing over can be very, very quote unquote evil, if you want to use those words, or very controlling and destructive. Absolutely. And that's what happens when we, are operating from a lack of security. We don't feel safe as a being, or we don't feel free. So we will act and react to those states with great violence. It's very much possible. That's the second reality I want to talk to you about. This is what happens when we don't recognize, right? When we don't recognize that the person we're in conflict with is actually motivated by the same core desires that we are. We become deluded. And I want you to just think about it today. If you're in conflict with somebody, maybe it's somebody at work, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a spouse. I want you to recognize at the end of the day, or even maybe you're watching the news and you're seeing two groups that are in conflict with each other, whether it's Russia or Ukraine or Israel and Palestine, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, there's just human beings. Even the terms we apply to talk about the other side, if you see that other side as that label and not the fact that they are literally the same essence as you, if you don't see them that way, and if you don't see that they are motivated by the same desire you have, you are susceptible to being manipulated into buying into this us versus them caricature, this kind of cartoonish, very, very, very primitive and immature way of looking at the world. We don't want to do that. Let the politicians do that. Let the media talking heads do that. For you, my heart for you is that you do not devolve into that kind of thinking. Okay. The third reality I want to talk about today is this thing called justice. This thing called justice. Because when I start talking about peace, and every time we talk about peace, when another global thing erupts or we have another hot spot that people are reacted to, have a knee-jerk reaction to and act in horror and want to, react with violence, people think that they are going to exact justice for some criminal wrong that's been done. Okay. I want you to, I have some good news about this. Okay. So one of the biggest pushbacks that people say to me when they say, so Jamal, if there's violence being done, if there's some injustice that's being done against you or your society, what are you supposed to do? Do you just let it happen? What about justice? Well, I want to say this, okay? And this is more of a big picture, right? To answer the question of like, what do you do? Obviously, in the moment, you can respond to violence through protecting yourself, all kinds of different things. There's many, many ways. That's a whole other conversation. I don't want to get lost in the weeds of that, but I want to say this about justice because people are afraid that if you do nothing, justice will not prevail. And first, I would say that you never do nothing. There's always something to be done. People think that peace is just doing nothing in the face of violence. You can drop that's an illusion. That is absolutely not what peace is. Peace is actually doing something despite the violence. If we just look at Martin Luther King Jr. in the 1960s during the Civil Rights era, he was extremely committed to peace, to nonviolence, to responding to violence with nonviolent actions. And it was extremely successful. If you know anything about the history of India, one of the greatest examples of the power of nonviolence, the most powerful nation in the world at the time was Great Britain. They had a global empire, and India was under their thumb. They were literally an oppressed colony of England for many years, and the Indian people wanted to be liberated from this colonial rule that was very, very unjust in many ways. And Mahatma Gandhi led one of the most powerful movements in modern history that led to the liberation of the Indian nation, the overthrow of the British colonial rule, without a shot being fired. No violence. There was a lot of violence done to them, but they did not use violence to accomplish their aims. Martin Luther King Jr. studied this. It's a very powerful peace. I say all that to say Peace is never doing nothing. It's actually the only thing you can do that's effective in the long run. But we'll talk more about that in a second. The tool of justice that most people are concerned about, they're concerned about injustice not being punished. They're concerned that if we do nothing, then justice will not be served. I'm here to tell you that built within the fabric of the universe, built within the fabric of the cosmos, of reality itself, is a magnificent tool of justice called karma. And now we're just talking about energy. There's no judge up there that's doling out punishment and rewards. I'm not talking about it from that vantage point. I'm talking about the karmic nature of energy, of reality. This is really just a principle of energy. We know this in physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So when you use a form of resistance or conflict or violence to accomplish your aims, the sheer nature of the way energy works is whatever energy you put out into the world comes right back to you, because that's how it works. It's a boomerang. It's always coming back. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. This is the law of physics. The same principle was taught by spiritual leaders. I mean, Jesus said, judge not lest you be judged, because in the manner in which you judge, it shall be measured back to you in the same way. Right? Give and it'll be given back to you. So be careful what you're giving out. If you give out violence because of violence, violence will come right back to you. This is a fact. There's another part, another passage from the New Testament that says, don't be deceived. Whatever you sow, it's an agricultural term. It says, whatever you sow, that you shall also reap. Another way of saying it is, whatever seeds you plant, that's the crop that's coming, right? If you plant seeds of violence, violence is going to be the crop you harvest, right? This is why 100% of all wars, and if we had some time, I could easily prove to you that no war has ever been successful. You may think it is. You may have read propaganda. You might have bought into things. No war has been successful. It has been a failure, because every war, and this is the crazy thing, all wars are fought to achieve peace. This is why the end of a war is a peace treaty, because that's what we're fighting for. We're trying to get to peace. But you cannot get to peace through violence. You cannot kill your way to peace. Every war has failed at achieving a lasting peace because of how energy works. And whenever you step in the way of the universe, right? I don't care. Some people say God, some people say the universe, whatever you want to use, however you want to put this, there is built into the fabric of existence a tool of justice, and that is called the karmic nature. Whatever energy that gets put out, that energy will come back. I know I'm speaking of karma in a very limited, very simplistic term, because there's a lot more to it than that. Obviously, if we work together in a life coaching capacity, you know that, because we go into much more of the karmic structure. But the tip of karma is simply action and reaction. So if you can recognize that justice is always served, if somebody acts in violence, that violence is going to come back to them. But here's the caution for you and I. If you become a tool of karma, meaning if you try to take that on yourself and be the instrument of justice, which is happening today, right? We see the response to violence with even more violence, even greater violence. This is what war is, right? You attack me, so I'm going to bomb you. You killed 100 of my people, I'm going to kill 10,000 of yours. I mean, this is the cyclical nature. Whenever you do that, whenever you react to the person you're working with, your coworker, your spouse, in the same energy that was dished out to you, you actually put yourself in front of the barrel of the gun of justice. You put yourself in the front. You become that same gun you're using to attack. You will get shot with that same energy, that same weapon, to use that analogy. You stand right in front of the barrel when you do that. It's all coming back to you. Doesn't matter why you did it. You could say it's self-defense. You could say whatever. If you live by the gun, if you live by the sword, as somebody once said, you will die by the sword. It's true 100% of the time. You don't want to die by the sword, don't live by it. Live by another mechanism entirely. That's the third reality I want to talk about, the tool of justice. Let karma, let the karmic process play out. You are never consciously, actively the tool of justice. Do not fall into that line. Let it happen. Let life take care of it. There's another role for you. And the fourth and the final reality I want to talk about today in regards to becoming or cultivating a inner culture of peace in the midst of a violent society is this. Understanding is very active and effective. So here's the thing. People always want to know, what do you do in the midst of such violence? Well, peace is not actually something, we have a misnomer, okay? There's a great misnomer out there that thinks that peace is you have to arrive at peace. You have to negotiate your way to peace. So at the national, international level, you have nations that are, they're in conflict. And so they're negotiating, terms that both sides can agree upon. And if they do agree upon it, there's a treaty, and then there's peace as long as we agree upon these terms. Maybe you're at a company where there's conflict amongst the management and the employees, and we're trying to negotiate our way to peace, or whatever it may be. I just want to say this, that peace is nothing you can arrive at. It's not something you negotiate. You actually have to be a person of peace. You have to become and embody and imbibe peace at the level of being. This has to be who you are. And how do you become a peaceful person? Largely, and this is the fourth reality, is that you need to increase your understanding. The understanding of what's motivating the person across from you. You're understanding that they're actually not fundamentally different than you, that they're actually just like you. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to believe the same things that they do. You could have very different beliefs. You could see the world fundamentally different than the person you're in conflict with does. That's totally fine. At the end of the day, they are the same species and essence as you. They're motivated by the same desires that you have. And if you will simply have that understanding, you will have a natural sense of compassion. Compassion will be the byproduct of understanding. Just simple compassion. You don't have to agree with what a person is doing. You could totally disagree with what a person, a group, a society is doing. But if you understand that they are fundamentally like you, they have the same core desires that you have, you will have a natural compassion for them. It doesn't matter what side of the conflict they're on or you're on. And from that understanding, simple understanding, will come wisdom, will come strength, will come creativity, will come strategy. So many things will come from that simple understanding. And that is the substance of peace that fills the vacuum. And right now, let's just use the conflict that's happening in the news right now in the Middle East. There is a profound ignorance on both sides. There is a profound ignorance of the other side, of what motivates them. There's a delusion that they're motivated by evil. They're not. There is no group in this world that's motivated differently than you're motivated. I know that can sound really crazy for some people. There is no group that is fundamentally different. No group. Everybody, at the end of the day, is motivated with the same core human desires. So the fruit of understanding, the actions of understanding, will lead to just tremendous compassion, And then there will be actions that will fill that vacuum. And it creates a culture of peace. And right now in this conflict, there's just too much ignorance of core desire, of seeing the other person as like themselves, understanding that the core desires that we have, the first two are just security and the desire for freedom. Just a lot of ignorance about that. It's okay that we disagree. We can disagree with anybody. But if you'll have understanding for where they're coming from, even in your disagreement, there will be the first seed of peace that is conceived will be compassion. And from compassion, that'll give birth to real substantive strategy to cultivate and create peace. But it has to be who you are as a person. I hope this makes sense. I hope this was clear. This was on my heart to share with you today. Obviously, you may be thinking, well, what can I do? I'm just a human being. I'm just some random individual just trying to live my life and be with my family and go to work. And the best thing you can do for this globe, for this society, for this world, for the conflict in the Middle East, believe it or not, for the conflict in the Middle East, the best thing you can do is become immune to manipulation. Do not be one of these people that just reacts to news reports and then gets on, and then just justifies violence. Or when you see our society, our government pouring gasoline on the fire by sending weapons and military actions and all these things, don't buy into that. Don't ever buy into that. Just see through it. Understand that you cannot kill your way to peace. You cannot fight your way to peace. You cannot bomb your way to peace. But you personally, all of us, you and I, we can all become people of peace. People that understand and know that there is no other. There's just people that are exactly like us, motivated by the same things that motivate us. At the core of all of our lives, we have these core key desires. There's 6 of them, like I mentioned. It's a other conversation, but at the end of the day, we all have the same desires, and your enemy wants the same thing that you want. And if you can just understand that they have a story, they have a perspective, you don't have to agree with it. But if you can understand it, you're on your way to becoming a person of peace. Hopefully this is helpful. Thank you for listening to this. I would ask you to share this episode with somebody that you feel like could benefit from this message. It's really important that we start to become people of peace. We have one world, we have one life. Whatever life you have right now, this is your life. This globe, the world, like this is, we need to start thinking about what kind of world do we want to create, because we're the ones creating it. Nobody else is doing it. We're doing it. What kind of world do we want to create? What kind of society do we want to create? What kind of a world do we want to leave behind for our children? Don't we want to break these patterns of self-defeating behavior, thinking we can just fight wars endlessly, thinking that we can stand with nations by sending them weapons? Can't we do more than that as a nation? My answer is yes, we can. Yes, we can. We absolutely can do so much more than just pour gasoline on a fire and send weapons. We can become a society, a culture, a peace. We can cultivate peace within our hearts, because at the end of the day, security and freedom are inner dimensions. They are inner qualities that must be cultivated from within. The only way to get out of the survival mindset is not by fighting your enemy out here. It's by turning inward and doing the work of healing from the inside. Then you can truly, and only then can you truly be free and secure. If you're listening to this episode, please like this. Please like this. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this. If you're listening via podcast, if you will rate and review this podcast on iTunes or Spotify, really helps the show. If everyone who listened to this did that, our show would really get a lot of traction, especially this episode. Please rate and review this podcast, this episode, if you're able. Share this episode. It's really important. And until next time, take care.